What's going on, good people? It's Nguvu from I Run a Gun Firearms Training, and tonight I wanted to go over dry fire and kind of give a good definition of what it is and how you can use it to best benefit you and your shooting skills. All right, so dry fire is weapons manipulations done absent of ammo, so no ammunition allowed. All right, so it's dry fire, not live fire. So what does that include? A lot of people think dry fire is simply using your gun and pressing the trigger, racking the slide, press the trigger, not allowing your sights to move. While that is dry fire, there's so much more to dry fire than just pressing the trigger. All right, so you can work on your trigger prep, trigger reset. You can work on your sight alignment, your index, so how you're lining up the gun when you're presenting it. Obviously your draw, reloads, malfunction, clearing, shooting around cover. There's a million things you can do in dry fire. Technically everything you can do at the range, you can do during dry fire, except work on recoil management, because the gun's not going to fire. Now, there are things like Cool Fire Trainer that does impart some recoil into the gun, but it's still not quite the same as what you would get at the range. So everything except recoil control can be done at home for free. So that means just gun handling, especially for new gun owners who aren't versed really in safe gun handling, because the way that you handle a firearm is not natural. So being able to keep your finger off the trigger, all right? So your finger's not on the trigger when it shouldn't be, or even inside the trigger guard if it's not on the trigger, right? Making sure you have complete muzzle awareness. All those things can be learned in dry fire at home for free, all right, without firing a single round, without spending any money. So your dry fire practice is kind of like condensed practice. The reason being is because when you're at the range, you have to spend time reloading magazines, you're looking at your target, you might have to reset the target, you're waiting for the target to come back and forth, you might have to actually walk down range, whatever it is. All that in dry fire you don't have. You're not resetting targets, you're not loading any magazines, you're not reloading or anything like that as far as magazines are considered. So you can get a lot more done in a small amount of time. So it's really condensed practice. So the way that I personally look at it, it's kind of like a subject in school. You're going to make your learning is going to be done at home when you're studying, right? So you get your study time, your learning, and then that's your dry fire. When you take the test, that's your range time, that's your live fire time. So when you go to the range, it's an evaluation of your shooting skill. Your target is telling you something. Every time you fire a round into your target, it's telling you something. Whether or not you're paying attention is another thing, but it's telling you something. So that range is the test. And then the range is going to allow you to evaluate if what you've been working on during live fire is working and to what degree, and then you can clean up areas that you might be still needing some practice with. No different than a test. You know, you did well on the math portion, maybe the physics part you didn't do as well. Maybe you nailed the history and got, you were great on that part, or whatever it is. It's the same thing with dry fire. So the bulk of your improvement is going to be done, or can be done, at home for free, right? So you never left your house, never fired around, didn't spend any money on ammo. You save time, gas, all those things. There's a million benefits to why you should be dry firing on a regular basis. Another benefit, especially for newer shooters that might have some level of anxiety about the gun firing and recoiling and just the sound of the gun going off, is that during dry fire, you don't have any of that. You already know in your mind the gun isn't going to fire, there isn't going to be any noise, so you don't have to concern yourself with that, especially if that gives you any kind of anxiety, right? Which is common for newer shooters. So during dry fire, there's none of that. So you can actually focus on, am I gripping the gun correctly? Am I pressing the trigger correctly? Am I transitioning from one target to the next correctly, leading with my eyes? Whatever the skill is that you're working on, you can actually focus on that, and you don't have to worry about the gun going off. Because if you're practicing on getting your gun out of the holster, you don't need to shoot in order to learn how to get your gun out of the holster. If you're practicing on reloading, you don't need to fire a round in order to practice reloads. If you're practicing on movement or getting behind cover, you don't need to shoot around in order to learn how to get behind cover. So what tools do you need in order to dry fire or effectively dry fire to improve, or even just maintain your skill level? You need your gun, right? And probably an empty magazine. You technically don't need the magazine for a lot of things, but you're definitely just gonna need your firearm, all right? So there's a lot of different gadgets out there, Cool Fire Trainer, dry fire mags, laser, dry fire lasers, there's a million things. You don't technically need any of that. You need your gun and maybe an unloaded magazine, depending on what you're doing, and that's it. So while you can buy some additional things, dry fire targets, I have all that shit, but you don't necessarily need that. You need your gun and then some dedicated time. So the question is, how much time? Depends on your goals. All right. So how much do you want to improve and how quickly? Technically, the average shooter, if they were to dedicate 5 to 10 minutes to dry fire 3 days a week, right? So somewhere between 15 to 30 minutes of uninterrupted, focused dry fire time every week, within 2 weeks, you would see a huge difference in your shooting without firing a single round. All right. Without firing any ammunition. You can also tell newer shooters or just shooters in general who don't dry fire, because typically their gun handling is pretty dangerous. You know, their trigger finger discipline is not where it needs to be. Muzzle awareness is not where it needs to be. And just when they go to handle the gun, like if they need to rack the slide or anything like that, their finger's not pinned to the slide or to the frame. So when they go to hit their magazine release, their trigger finger starts moving back this way. They need to lock the slide back to the rear. They're having issues with that. All those things can be learned, again, during dry fire. And it is actually safer to learn a lot of those things at home without ammunition before you introduce the ammunition to the firearm. So now there is one tool that is extremely beneficial, but again, it's not needed, and that is the shot timer. All right, so there's a couple routes you can go with this. So what a shot timer does is you can use it for, in dry fire, one of two things. You can either set it so it'll give you an audible start signal. And when you have the audible start signal, that'll be your indicator to start whatever drill that you're supposed to start, right? So this one's set for 1 second. So you can either have it just for first beep to tell you to start, or if I'm doing a drill and I'm working on something, so let's say I'm working on my draw from concealment, right? So I can get my gun out in 1 second. So the only way I'm going to know that is to have a shot timer. What I can't do is have someone time me, because then you run into the issue of the person moving before the clock does. That's the same reason why 40-yard dashes are faster at pro days than they are at the combine. So if you're standing in the room with me and then you're going to start the stopwatch when I move, I'm moving before the clock starts. Right, so that means I'm always going to be faster in that situation. But an actual draw or reload or whatever it is should start from some kind of start signal or something like that, some kind of stimulus, and then you start. So the beep would start, which means the clock starts as soon as the beep does. I have to react to it, get my gun out or whatever the drill is, and complete the drill in X amount of time, whatever time that is. The time really doesn't matter. What matters is the difference in time. So if it takes me 3 seconds to get my gun out, all right, I'm at 3 seconds. So if I'm working on my draw again and again, eventually I'll be able to get down to 2.8, 2.5, 2 seconds, and all the way down to whatever time. I've seen people get their gun out of from concealment at 0.8. It's just crazy. So you won't know that unless you're using a timer. So you can use one of these, which is a shot timer that will work during live fire and dry fire, or you can download an app like this one. This one's one of my favorites. And in the app, it'll actually store all of your different drills and your par time. So you don't have to remember, okay, my draw was 1 second, my reload was 1.4 seconds or whatever it is. All that will be stored in the app. So that's something that's really beneficial. The apps, if you're on Android, there's a lot of them that are free. Some might be $10. Trust me, it's worth it. Apple users or iPhone users, you typically have to pay. There aren't many free ones for you all, but should have got an Android. But either way, the shot timer is definitely beneficial if you're talking about speed and efficiency, because that's going to allow you to measure that accurately. You can't do it with a stopwatch. All right, so hopefully I was able to shed some light on what dry fire is and what it isn't. Again, it's not just pressing the trigger, making sure your front sight doesn't move. That's part of it, but that's not even the tip of the iceberg of what dry fire is and what it can be. You're really only limited to your imagination. So either way, if you have any questions, down in the comments, let me know. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already. If you're in the Delaware area or southeastern Pennsylvania, southern Jersey, or northern Maryland, I am doing a dry fire class on July 31st. It is $50. We'll be in there for about 2 hours. In this particular class, we're going to work on shooting on the move or shooting while moving and shooting multiple or engaging multiple targets. So you won't want to miss that one. Again, I'll see you down in the comments. Y'all be safe.
Give me the 14 when it's 14. what you know about? AR-15, the classic speed, making us start speed. What you know about? Give me the 14 when it's 14, we kill 14, what you know about? AR-15, the classic speed, making us start speed.